Do you have any sort of overall thoughts, Oliver, on what we were seeing beyond those titles?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple other games that we could mention here. There's a port of Apex Legends, which, unlike the Switch port of Apex Legends, is running at 60 FPS and looks to be running in pretty good form here with, nicely temporally treated visuals. Looks like a high quality port. There's also the upcoming Chronos by Bloober Team. Looks intriguing.
Right.
Yeah.
Looks pretty good here. Running pretty well, looking pretty good. I'm excited to see how that turns out on Switch 2. We've not seen a ton of footage from that game in general, a ton of gameplay stuff. They're keeping it pretty close to their chest, even though it's just a little bit more than a month out from release as we speak here. So I'm going to be excited to see how that game turns out on Switch 2. But overall, I think this presentation, I kind of regarded a little bit more positively than maybe some other people. But at the same time, I did have some higher expectations going into this presentation just because it's the very first post-Switch 2 launch presentation from Nintendo. The very first Direct. And I know the partner Directs aren't often not up that same level of quality as the main Nintendo Directs. A higher level of quality than the Indie World showcases, but often not up that same level of quality as the main Nintendo Directs that we tend to see. So... that is a little bit disappointing in some respects, but I expect that Nintendo is holding their cards close to their chest for a potential Super Mario 40th Anniversary Direct or something to coincide with that release in August or perhaps September of this year, where I would expect them to show off more of their first-party slate as well as probably some potentially third-party heavy hitters that might get released later in this year or into 2026. I'd expect to see that later on. So I don't think this is the only salvo we're going to see from Nintendo in the next few months.
Yeah, I guess there was a lot of expectation for this one, particularly when people were talking about Red Dead Redemption 2 ports.
Yeah.
And, there's always been the kind of, there's been the sort of underlying rumor pre-launch for Switch 2 that basically everybody is porting everything to Switch 2. And that's clearly, if it is happening, we're not seeing it yet. I mean, there's some other stuff that I'd love to have seen, which we kind of do know is in development, but I guess it's just taking more time. But, I wasn't sort of, I was kind of sort of ambivalent on the presentation. There was some good stuff in there, I thought, but at the same time, you just know that there's better stuff en route, I think. But, this will tide us over in the meantime. I guess, when I was looking at stuff like Madden, I was thinking that it didn't particularly impress me in terms of performance. And I do wonder whether there's a sort of porting situation going on where they bring the game across to Switch 2 and it doesn't really receive the kind of customization / optimization / dare I say it, downgrades required for good performance. And I don't think that's the best way to attack those projects, really. Just sort of get it across running at a reasonable rate. I just think good, solid performance is so crucial. And, I hope that's not a trend that we're seeing. But beyond that, fairly enjoyable. It really did a disservice, though, to Switch 1 games, which just don't really look that great anymore, though, when it's sort of surrounded by Switch 2 fare. Yeah. Okay, and John, what are your final thoughts?
Well, so one of the things nobody mentioned here, actually, that I thought was cool, was they showed off Yakuza Kiwami 2, which is running the Dragon engine. So we had Yakuza 0 at launch, but that was the older PS3 engine, right? And they actually showed off this new game here, and most of the footage was 60 FPS, which is cool because it was a mix, actually, but the PS4 versions of the Dragon engine games were all 30. So that's nice to see that, actually. So I think that's a very positive thing. They also showed that remake of Pac-Man World 2.
Oh, that did look
which
great.
is cool. Repack, that looks really good, so I feel like that's worth a shout. And in the Japanese Direct, Nippon Ichi showed Hono Garashi no Niwa, which was like a sort of horror, like sort of life game that looked kind of interesting. I would recommend going to check that out in that one. There was actually a bunch of other games shown in the Japanese Direct that didn't show up in the North American one. So if you want a few more announcements, they are in there. But my real final thoughts on this is that I think Nintendo is making some big mistakes this time with Nintendo Switch 2. I think there's plenty of time to course correct, but I think they're too afraid of leaving Switch 1 behind, and they're creating and as a result, they've created a less compelling product with Switch 2. And
sorry, tell us more. How?
It reminds me of when they transitioned from like DS to 3DS, where they had this successful thing and they seemed afraid to go all in, and the initial release period seemed very dry, and they're not taking the opportunities to really get the excitement out there about the new system, because every time they talk about it, they always got to mention the original Switch as well. And they're just so focused on not really showing what it can do. And so all these Switch 2 games we do see, the few games that are actually Switch 2, they're mostly just ports of existing games that look worse than the other versions. That's not really exciting. It's not getting people talking about the Switch 2 all that much. And I think it doesn't have the energy the Switch 1 did.
Right.
And I think that comes down to the market situation. When Switch 1 was launched, the Wii U was a failure. 3DS was coming up on the end of life. Switch 1 was their everything. They had to put everything they had into it. And they shifted all messaging to Switch 1. That made it something super desirable. It was very obvious what it did. People wanted it right away. People still want the Switch 2, but I think a lot of it's just on the goodwill and love of the Switch 1. And right now, the Switch 2, I mean, it has good games to begin with, but it just feels like the messaging around it and the way that they're talking about it, it's not nearly as exciting as it should be. It feels very much like the bean counters are in charge now kind of thing. And I really think they're just like super, super afraid of letting that Switch 1 audience go to the detriment of this new hardware. And that they need to start getting some more exciting announcements, stuff that makes people say, yeah, I want to get a Switch 2 going now.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's not too late. There's still plenty of time to bring that excitement back. They could do a direct in a month from now or 2 months that does all this stuff, and they're fine. But I just feel like this initial after launch period just has not been anywhere near as interesting, as exciting as one would have hoped. And certainly it's nothing compared to the Switch 1.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Would you concur with that, Oliver?
I mean, I think certainly Nintendo's treatment of like third parties has not been great. I mean, you look on Nintendo's website and they still say that development kits are not yet available for, interested third parties potentially, or contacting them through their web interface, which is certainly a concern. I also share John's concerns potentially about the sandwiching of Switch 2 software with Switch 1 software. Does not feel like they fully committed. Indeed, apparently their messaging to developers is like, if you're shipping on Switch 1, that's wonderful. You don't need to worry about Switch 2 because you can play it on Switch 2 anyways, which does not seem like the right messaging to have around a console that's much more capable than a Switch 1. You should want bespoke versions of those games in almost all cases on Switch 2. But I would say the Switch 2 rollout to me in terms of first-party software has actually been pretty good. Donkey Kong is really, really good. I love Mario Kart World. Both those games are really solid. I was not expecting much from Donkey Kong pre-release, and that's just been a huge surprise. I've also loved Fast Fusion. To me, it in terms of the first-party output, it's at least rivaling the Switch 1, if not exceeding it in that early era. But I do think that there's a concerning lack of details. I'm not concerning, but there's a certain lack of details from Nintendo on what the rest of 2025 looks like. Most of the other Nintendo first-party software has not been dated yet for 2025, which is a concern of mine. And then the third-party software is still kind of up in the air a little bit, like Final Fantasy VII Remake hasn't been dated. Other games like that are not totally nailed down at the moment. So I'd like to see more clarity on that. Perhaps they're withholding that for the Super Mario potentially themed direct that might be coming down the pipe. And I also want to see some inkling, which I hope we'll get later this year, of Nintendo's 2026 plans. I just tease would be sufficient. Just show me like that first image of Mario the plumber, that silhouette. That's enough for me, Just show us something to get people excited. That doesn't need to be a full reveal, but just give us some inkling rather, of what titles will show up in 2026.
And Oliver, that last point you said about the dev kit situation, that is seriously actually starting to cause problems, right? Like, we just had Ninja Gaiden Ragebound released, right? Yeah. Shinobi Art of Vengeance has a demo. I played the demo on there. The image quality sucks. It looks bad on the Switch too. It's not sharp at all. That art is amazing. I loaded it up on the PS5 and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So it's that game right there is being hamstrung by the fact that there's no native Switch 2 version. And I'm sure Nintendo told them if they tried, oh, well, it's fine. Just, you got a Switch 1 version. And the Switch 1 version is 60 FPS, but the image quality sucks. It's not crisp at all. It's not good. And then you have Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, despite what they say, it's just capped at 30 FPS because of the Switch 1. And it's a 2D side-scrolling game. Like, I wanted to buy both of these games on Switch, but Switch 2, but I'm not going to do that because they suck on there, right? It's this type of situation happening right now is not good. And I feel like this is a product of Nintendo being very, very limited with their development kits and this whole, just continue making it for Switch 1. It's not a good idea, and it's hurting these games, and they need to change this.